Would you like to play some football?
And welcome to yet another edition of Gridiron and the Gospel, a faith and college football podcast. I'm George Schroeder, joined by Brad Edwards and Todd Unzicker, and we are so glad that you guys have joined us after a great national championship game. And we overuse the word great, but I thought it was a tremendously entertaining college football game, and I'm glad that it was, because I don't know what we thought it was going to be, but Indiana wins the national championship, goes 16-0, and beats Miami in a really good game that wasn't decided until inside the final minute, when Carson Beck's pass was a little bit underthrown and his receiver didn't look back for the ball either, and the Hoosier celebration finally could start. And so first, we're gonna do a couple different things, and we want to try to put this in its own proper sort of historical perspective, what it means. But let's just talk about the game for a while, because it's fresh on our minds. We're recording this on Tuesday. The game was, of course, Monday night, and you guys are listening to it a couple of days later. But Brad, Todd, your initial thoughts on what you saw play out on the field at Hard Rock Stadium Monday night. Brad.
My initial thoughts last night and since I woke up this morning were kudos to Brad Edwards from Gridiron and the Gospel, because he said this game would come down to special teams. Brad, that's what it came down to, a blocked punt, and that was ultimately the decider. We don't know how all that would have shaken out, but when you look at it, special teams rears its head, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And I got to tell you, last night when Indiana scored on the fourth down draw play in the fourth quarter to go up 24-14, I thought to myself, that sounds familiar. And I went back and I listened to our last episode. My prediction was Indiana would win 24-14. They would take a 3-point lead to the fourth quarter, would score a touchdown in the first half of the fourth quarter to go up by that score, and then it would end that way. Of course, that's where I was wrong. Miami marched back down the field, answered yet again. Because, at halftime, at 10-0, we knew the game wasn't over. But the way that Indiana has played in this playoff, and the way that they played defensively, the way that Miami's offense was struggling to move the ball, you felt like, okay, if it gets to be more than 2 touchdowns, this game's over. Miami gets the touchdown, make it 10-7. But when Indiana gets the block punt and goes up by 10 again, I thought at that point it's over. I was not expecting Miami to come down and answer immediately, which they did. And then I certainly wasn't expecting to answer again after the fourth quarter touchdown by Indiana. So, so much credit to Miami for hanging in there and, what they showed by pushing that game to the limit. And look, we talked about it on here last week, how Indiana does not beat itself. They're not going to make mistakes. You have to take the game from them. And then at that moment when it was on the precipice of being ended, Indiana, their best offensive lineman, false starts on 2nd and 1. They needed 1 yard to end the game. And that one mistake, which was just so unlike Indiana, gives Miami life. And they gave us a reason to watch until the very end. I'll say that. So great game, and was just very entertaining. And, for those who stayed up all the way to watch it, it was well worth their time.
Yeah. Indiana up 10-0 at halftime, as you mentioned, and none of that came easy against Miami's defense. None of us probably thought that Miami was going to get its offense untracked. And they did, to their credit. In the second half, they got some things going a little bit. Actually scored more offensive touchdowns in the game than Indiana did. But, of course, that Indiana is as complete a team as we've seen in a long time. I think Nick Saban actually said that in the run-up to the game, the pregame, and I think he's right. I'm sure he'll be glad to know that I think he's right. But they're complete. And usually when we think about that, we mean offense and defense. And like we asked the question last week, what are they better at, offense or defense? And I think it's defense. but their special teams doesn't make any mistakes, and their special teams comes up with plays. And that's what, of course, you brought up. Speaking of not making mistakes, this is an amazing thing. I don't have the exact number, but I saw this earlier today. Their last lost fumble for the 2025 season was in game 1.
Yeah.
1,000 plus snaps. First quarter of game 1, they lost a fumble. There were more than 1,000 snaps since then, offensive plays, without a lost fumble. Doesn't mean they didn't put the ball on the ground, but they recovered it. That is amazing. That is not making mistakes. And 27-21, very worthy champions for sure. So, Miami pushed them around with the Miami defense in a way that we hadn't really seen in a while. Mendoza didn't have a lot of time. They bothered him. Obviously, in the first half, they hit him several times. A couple of times were probably should have been flagged. At least one should have been flagged.
Yeah, but Cignetti thought so too.
Well, he definitely did. But they really got to him and caused them all sorts of trouble. I mean, he did not have a great game until he needed to. But Miami's defense, especially the edge rushers, that clearly gave them fits, and that's what kept Miami in the game and allowed them to have the chance the second half to come back.
Yeah, it was a physical game. I mean, I that was one of the things I noticed pretty early on. Mendoza took a hit on that second drive for Indiana. You could tell that there was a game plan there. I thought the officiating was pretty good. If you're going to call it one way, stay consistent. And they let these guys play. I mean, there was somebody texted me and said, is there pass interference in football anymore? And I'm okay with that as long as they called it both ways. And I felt like they did. I mentioned last week, I did not have confidence in Cristobal and his end game, really just play calling. And I just kind of look at my notes. I made a note during the second drive for Miami, the third drive for Miami, and then in the fourth drive, it's like they abandoned the run.
Yeah, absolutely.
They came out, it was really halfway through the first drive. And then on the fourth drive for Miami, it was 3rd and 2, and they bring that extra lineman in. And I said to my son, I was like, this is going to be inside zone right here. I mean, I think everyone in the world knew, and there was no push. Indiana's linebackers shot those gaps, and they failed to convert. And on the fourth drive was that just a dominating drive. That's when I think, Brad, I was sitting there kind of like, okay, this was what I was expecting, that Miami would come out hot, offense couldn't do much, and they threw that touchdown to the fullback, and just a dominating performance. I think that was with like 6 minutes left. But kudos to Miami. They drove down again, and then when we heard that doink, I wish we had a sound effect, George. The doink,
that was the most doink as I've heard in a long time.
Me too. I thought the same thing. I thought, okay, here we are, but what a second half.
I actually thought, do they really have that thing mic'd that loud, that the goalpost mic'd that loud, or is somebody hitting the button at exactly the right time back at the studios?
Our younger listeners won't get this, but it reminded me of the old Batman live action show, when there was like the snap, pow, doink.
There's a smaller aging demographic that gets that, but a lot of our listeners don't, probably. That's right. The old Adam West Batman is what you're talking about, way back in the day. We actually had to watch it on syndicated reruns on the afternoon when we came home from school, right? Maybe some people watch it on TV Land or something. Is that still a thing, TV Land? I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't know either. But
George, you're really showing your age now. You've lost Brad and I.
I know. Well, TV Land, come on, man. That's cable TV. Come on. Listen, I have a couple of thoughts. One is Indiana's a better team, but Miami could have won that game and would have been a worthy national champion. They were, as it turns out, Miami, the 10 seed, is really, really good. And that is indicative of how flat the landscape is in college football now. Really good, at least by comparison to all the other teams around that they're playing in the 2025 season, and easily good enough to do it. And let's not forget that it wasn't but a month ago that we were all going, can they get in the playoff? Or a month and a half ago, can they even get in the playoff? Who's going to get in, them or Notre Dame? Shouldn't they both get in? All that stuff. And here they are at the end, driving with a chance to win the national title.
Yeah, I think what we've seen the last 2 years is just the tremendous change in the landscape of college football due to the expansion of the playoff and what that does to the regular season. because Ohio State last year, Miami this year are teams that when you look back on it at the end, you ask, how did they lose 2 games in the regular season? But that playoff, the format gives you margin for error that no team has ever had before, where you can lay a couple of eggs, and as inexplicable as they may have been, you could still find yourself in the playoff. And as long as you play up to your potential, then you got a chance. And, if you watch Miami just in the playoff, if you might have seen them a few times in the ACC part of the schedule, but if you watch them just in the playoff, you're looking at their running backs. Okay. You're looking at their receivers, their offensive line, and you're thinking to yourself, against that schedule, how did they not score 50 points a game? Because, Malachi Toney, like
Oh
that
goodness.
kid, how did anybody in the ACC ever tackle him? And you look at Bain on defense as well, and I think you could make a really good argument that Miami might have 3 players that are at least arguably the best in the nation at their position. And
so Bain, what?
Mesidor.
Are you saying both ends, both edge rushers?
No. I would say at running back, at receiver,
Mark Fletcher. Yeah,
and
Toney,
at defensive end. And I see, look, receiver, and this is how highly I think of Toney, is that I think depending on what style of offense you have, and I think more important, what level of quarterback play you have, you might choose Toney before you would choose Jeremiah Smith. Like, if you have a quarterback who's somewhat limited, not great at stretching the field, like I might choose Toney because of his all-around ability, and you can get the ball in his hands behind the line of scrimmage and the things that he can do. No question. If I've got a really good quarterback, give me Jeremiah Smith over everybody else. But the fact that this is even a conversation, and you're talking a guy who, he can't weigh what, more than 180?
Yeah, supposedly 5'9", 173, I think. Is that right? Something like that.
And as we're reminded every time, he should still be in high school right now. But yeah, you look at the talent that Miami has, and I think it just, when we get back to it, it just
5'11".
underscores what an incredible team Indiana is, because this was the 4th game in a row that they lined up against someone that on paper has a lot more talent than they have. And they went 4-0 in those games. Ohio State, Alabama, Oregon, Miami.
And we're the better team.
And I don't
clearly
think
the better team in all 4 of those games.
You're right. And they were clearly the better team.
Even though this one was a tight one.
Yeah. And that says everything you need to know about Indiana. And to me, that is what I love about them having done this in the 4-team playoff format. And it wasn't like a 1984 BYU situation where they managed to go undefeated and they played a team that was barely above 500 in a bowl game. And,
yeah. But you mean the 12-team playoff era?
Yeah, what did I say?
Team.
Oh, sorry, the 12-team. But
yeah.
But I'm just so glad that people will not be able to look back on this and say, yeah, but who did they? No, they won this on the field against the best teams that you could have lined them up against. And that to me is worth so much as we look back on this years from now and try to put it into even more perspective than we're doing right now.
I think so. And let's get to that in a second, but just the 2 QBs, let's start with them because that's sort of where the focus is. You obviously had the great story, Mendoza coming home. As he said after the game, full circle. They didn't even let me walk on there. And then Carson Beck, who of course transferred away from Georgia to Miami. But let's start with Carson Beck because we can go to Mendoza here in a minute. Beck, I thought he played fairly well. I thought he started to make some plays. The last drive is not his strong suit. He's best, and Todd has watched him a lot more than either of us, but he's at his best when he's in not in you have to pass situations. Now, listen, that's him and a bunch of other quarterbacks, right? But what I mean is if you give me Trinidad Chambliss, I might go, I like you in a 2-minute situation where all you're going to do is throw the ball around the yard. What I like with Carson Beck is if he's got the play action because somebody's running, they're running it fairly well, which Miami does. And so they're in a normal situation where they're not hurried, and he's able to have the threat of the run and then drop back to pass. I like him much better there. But I thought he had a pretty good game last night. Todd, you've watched Carson Beck a lot. What were your thoughts? Obviously, the last interception he's going to want to have back forever. But thoughts?
Yeah, much has been made about Carson Beck, and he overcame adversity with a horrific injury that he suffered in his last game with Georgia against Texas in the SEC championship. But the guy only has 6 losses in his career and in 3 seasons. And what I thought was pretty amazing was that 4 of those 6 losses, his final pass was an interception when he's trying to lead a comeback. And it's a little bit of what we got. His first year was arguably his best. Oh, and by the way, he was throwing to a guy named Brock Bowers and a guy named Ladd McConkey, who are both studs on their teams on Sundays. I didn't think Carson was that good. I just didn't think he imploded. I thought there were a lot of throws that he made that he was really forcing. I thought there was some stuff over the middle that Miami, my 11-year-old son who's a quarterback, said, Dad, he was wide over on the middle. He missed it. I just don't see the confidence there that I saw in Beck 2 years ago. And I don't fault him. Anybody's going to make a bad read there at the end. Indiana doesn't make mistakes, and if you do, you lose, and that's what happened there.
Well, and it's a tough situation to be in. That's right, yeah.
I didn't think he was great. I don't think that they lost because of him, and I think they needed a Carson Beck from 2 years ago performance, and they didn't get that.
But here's what I think. I think they pretty much got the Carson Beck they got all year in a lot of ways. It's just they were good enough to beat. Obviously, they lost those 2 games midseason, but they were good. It coulda, woulda, shoulda beaten everybody because of all the other pieces they have, and he's a credible quarterback. But I don't, a year ago they had an all-world guy in Cam Ward. Carson Beck was never going to be that guy for them, and so I think they got against a team like Indiana, about as good a performance as you could get out of Carson Beck, probably in the current iteration of who he is and who he's been. Brad, I know you may have some thoughts on him too. 19 of 32 for 232, 1 touchdown, 1 interception.
Yeah, I mean, I said last week in our preview that Carson Beck is probably not going to beat you, right? And it appeared if you watch Miami closely, they didn't want him trying to win the game for them. And they got down to the last drive, and there was no other option. He had to be the guy to get it done because they were out of timeouts. Couldn't run the ball. It had to be through the air. And yeah, he didn't make the play at the very end when they needed it to win a championship. Like you said, there were a lot of guys. Most guys are going to come up short because the reality was at some point in that drive, they had to throw into the end zone. And he probably pressed and tried to do it a little sooner than they needed to. And that ended up being the end of it. But in defense of Carson Beck, I will say this, and look, I mean, this is, looking at who I think as Todd was alluding to, not at who he was his first year as a starter, but kind of who he was this season.
Right.
A lot of people went into this playoff thinking Miami is only going to last until Carson Beck has his first 3 interception game, and then they're gone because their margin for error, like they're not going to be able to win if he goes out and turns the ball over. And he didn't do that. I mean, that's why they made it to the championship, and that's why they were still in it until the final drive, is because he did what his coach asked him to do, which is take care of the ball. And I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that he did, whether it was in the huddle, whether it was checkdowns, whatever it may be, that we don't see. Where he got his teammates in position for them to succeed. All we really notice and remember is what happened when he put the ball in the air. And, I know Miami fans will be reliving that pass for quite a while. It didn't end well, but I thought all in all in the playoff, he played pretty well. He didn't win a game for them, but he certainly was not a weak link and he wasn't a liability.
Yeah. He didn't lose a game.
He looked so good in that Ole Miss drive. I mean, that drive, he kind of won that game. That was a flash, and that was, I had that thought, and that started that drive are we going to see what he did against the Rebels? And is he going to do that here? And he just came up short. We're talking Carson Beck, but I mean, that Mendoza run on that draw play,
4th and 4 draw
that's
play.
going to be that's etched in my memory forever.
Well, that's the one where if Sports Illustrated was still a thing, that's the photo. Is when he's stretching the ball out the line, and I understand, and I've got buddies that work for Sports Illustrated. It still is a thing, but it's not the phenomenon that it used to be, and they don't, it's not a magazine that you wait to get 3 days later or whatever, anymore. So, but that was the photo, and you couldn't wait to see it. But that's also the defining sort of moment of a lot of different things. Fernando Mendoza obviously had a year for the ages. This was not a great game for him, partly because he was bothered and hit and pressured and sacked a bunch and just, it was his lowest passer rating since week 1. And he just, but he made the plays when he had to make them. And a couple of plays, right? A couple of those back shoulder throws to Charlie Becker when they had to have them. And that play you're talking about, 4th and 4, when a field goal doesn't help you, so they call timeout. Field goal puts you up 6. They call timeout and decide to go for the touchdown. And then he just says he's going to go do it. I mean, that was an amazing. Everything about it was amazing. The guts of Cignetti to call it, even if the I don't know what the book says on a field goal right there, because I don't know that 6 is what you want to lead by, but
there was still a lot of time left. Yeah.
Yeah. Just the whole thing was amazing. It was an
Yeah,
amazing.
and it was 4th and
play.
5 too, though. I mean, it was 4th and 5.
I agreed.
That's
right. Yeah, it wasn't 4th and 1, but
no.
But
and he ran the kicking team out and called timeout.
Right. And then they took him. Yeah, and we thought that they were just calling the timeout because they made a late decision to send them on, and maybe that was part of it. But no one was expecting when we came back from break that the offense was going to come back on the field. And yeah, I'm pretty sure that was an analytics play. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but yeah. So I was thinking to myself, how many coaches in that split second when he decided to lunge for the goal line with the ball, how many
he's already
coaches,
got the first down. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. How many coaches watching that are like, no, what? Like you said, he had already picked up the first down. If he doesn't do that, they have worst case 1st and goal from the 1 or the 2. How many times have you seen a guy lunge for the goal line like that? The ball hits someone's helmet, comes out, and now, and it is easy to say, oh, look, he had it easy because the ball broke the plane by a lot before he ever got hit. But he was off balance, and he didn't know that at the time that he kind of went airborne and went for it.
And he got popped. He got popped on that play too. So if he gets popped, a yard sooner, who knows?
Right. And look, even though, like I said, he clearly crossed the plane before contact, I still give him a lot of credit for holding onto the ball after the hit because, that he easily could have lost that one. And can you imagine if you go for it, get the first down, and then you lose the ball at the goal line, and then they recover in the end zone and get it to 20.
Well, we talked some shoulda, coulda, wouldas there, and I thought the same thing, Brad. That maybe it's the coach in me. I thought, oh no, watch him fumble here. I thought Miami should have been going to Fletcher sooner. He got that big run on the second play of Miami's first drive in the second half, but I thought there was too much trying to go inside, and I think the advantage that Miami clearly still has, that this showed, that team speed, any kind of play with Fletcher over the C gap or just off tackle, getting him going downhill, I would have taken my chances a lot more with that. Now, I'm sure the offensive coordinator was sitting there. Indiana clearly was not threatened by Beck. They were stacking. They were sending those front four, and the linebackers were staying home. But, that was one thing we talked about on this last episode was Miami's got to run the football. Now, he ended up with a lot of runs. I think he had 17 carries for 112 yards, but 57 of them of those 112 came on the one run. And I really thought pounding those out a little more would have served the Hurricanes better in the long run.
What was interesting was in the first half, Indiana looked like what we thought Miami's offense might look like, in that they were the ones that were just sort of moving the ball very slowly, had a 14-play drive, had a 15-play drive, I think, for their, for the field goal and touchdown. And It was like, it felt like, and you mentioned this earlier in the pod a few minutes ago, it felt like Miami, they got a 9-yard run from him on the first play from that they had the ball. And then it felt like they went away from it. And they were not trying to be, they weren't being who they were. And I don't know. In second half, they got back to it a little bit. And again, if not for that block punt, who knows what happens, right?
Yeah.
In a punt safe situation, by the way. And I do not know why the protector just sort of basically like kind of whiffed on him and didn't really work hard to get him, because you wouldn't have had to do a whole lot, just a slight glancing blow, and he wouldn't have gotten near the ball.
Mm-hmm.
But those are the
He
little
didn't
things.
listen to Brad on last week's episode.
He did not. It's like special teams. That's going to be it. So, all right. Anything else about the actual game itself last night? 60-40 crowd split in Miami at the home stadium of the Hurricanes, 60-40 in favor of Indiana were the estimates that I saw. That's an amazing thing. Shows you how, especially with the ticket prices being well over $3,000 a ticket, that is an amazing thing. And it also shows you how meaningful that is to Indiana, I think, how meaningful it was just to be there. So anything else about the game last night from you guys' standpoint? Otherwise, let's move on to bigger picture.
Great game. He's not here. He probably didn't want to be on the day after the game, but Dean was sending us pictures, and certainly, great experience for him and his boys. Dean said last week, Miami's not a sports town, it's an event town. And when they showed that sideline, it looked like an event for the Miami Hurricanes, and the celebrities and, Secretary of State Rubio and, the concert pit bulls out there playing outside, before that started. And I thought of Dean, that it was an event and a ton of fun, and kudos to those Indiana fans, because they got that place loud. I mean, it was a weird sensation to watch Miami on offense. And clearly the crowd noise was bothering them right there in Hard Rock Stadium.
In their own stadium, right. No, that's right. So, yeah, no, it was, and I guess Indiana's actual celebrity was Mark Cuban wearing the stylishly faded pink-looking T-shirt, Indiana T-shirt, right? He was their celebrity. Now, let me just tell you this. If that's going to be your celebrity, I like the fact that he's a billionaire. And so, if you need your NIL funded, he can help you a little bit. Pull it right out of the couch cushions, right? So that's good. But all right, so big picture here. Is there any doubt that this is the greatest college football story of all time at this point? They completed it 16-0, first team to go 16-0 in a season since Yale in 1894. Now, obviously, there weren't 16 games in seasons, but still, you got to go back to the 19th century.
Yeah, Yale was playing the West Hartford JV team in some of those 16 games back then.
That's right. Whatever. Yeah. So, I'll go back to what I said last week. I have a bigger question, which is this the greatest story in the history of sports? And I mean, if we want to restrict it to turnarounds, is it the greatest turnaround? Now, obviously, there have been, a number of times a team has gone from worst to first, but that's like worst in a division to first in a division. If you go back and look, Indiana 2 seasons ago, they didn't just have a bad record, but they were getting blown out. Well, I mean, yeah, I guess if you count this season, 3 seasons ago or whatever.
No. I'm saying they won 3 games.
Yeah, won 3 games.
2.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the year before he got there, Tom Allen's last year, they won 3. They went 3-9. That's all I was saying. So those of you guys who are listening to us, if you're watching us on YouTube, I held up 3 fingers. So
right. And so, I thought you were correcting me on the number of years, but I was like, yeah, but they weren't just losing. I mean, I guess you can pull it up, George, and see who the wins came against, but they probably didn't have more than 1 win in the Big Ten. And I would guess that in a number of those games,
they had 3 Big Ten wins in the 3 years before Cignetti was hired, and I don't know if they were 0 for any of those years.
And I would imagine they probably lost their fair share of games by 30 plus points. So their degrees of bad, and Indiana was, like the worst degree of bad. And then to go from that to this, and here's the other thing, which I think will get lost in history, to do it at the time they did, where you have the NIL. And I know people will look at Indiana and they will say, portal, like without the portal, they don't do this. And that's true. Without the portal, they don't do it. But what people are missing is that the players that Indiana got out of the portal, they wouldn't even have been invited to campus coming out of the portal by Ohio State and Michigan. And
this is not the
Georgia
same as the
and
Texas
Alabama
Tech portal loading.
Yeah,
right.
No, this is not like they outbid people to get these guys that everybody wanted. These are middle of the road guys from middle of the road schools that the big programs had no interest in the same way as the guys who signed with Indiana out of high school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the bigger programs weren't paying any attention to them. And so, yeah, it was the portal, but they didn't build this team through the portal by spending 20-something million dollars as Ohio State did the year before. And I think that's the part that will get lost. And, I don't know. There could end up being a few guys on this team that end up having great NFL careers. And maybe we look back on it and say, hey, you know what? They were way more talented than people realize. But I think it's also possible that this was a team of Hunter Renfrows, you know, that just guys who just, weren't quite tall enough or weren't quite fast enough or whatever. And yet you put them all together and they were the perfect team. And that to me is what Indiana was all about.
I think that's right. 3-9 2 years ago, that they went 1-8 in the Big Ten that year, 2023, before they hired Cignetti. And he is now 27-2. Another number here. As they went into the 2025 season, the one we just completed, they had 715 program losses, which obviously they added none to. That was the most in history until Northwestern passed them this year, and now they have 718 counting. So it's here's one more thing: the Hoosiers are the first-time national champion since Florida in 2006.
Yeah,
No,
and that Florida team.
1996. Thank you. Not 2006. I don't know what I'm saying. Yeah.
Right. That Florida team had been a top 10 team for quite a while before they finally won the national championship. They didn't come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
That's right.
Bear Bryant was always known to say, and Brad, you probably remember this, that he used to kind of in his Bear Bryant way used to quip, if they'll figure out what they're doing down there, that's the sleeping giant. This is Indiana.
Talking about Florida, yeah.
I was thinking about my time, in the business, so to speak. I cut my teeth covering recruiting. And 20-something years ago, it wasn't much different than it was 5 years ago in that you needed 5 stars and you were sad when you just ended up with 4. And those were the teams that go. Hence why we haven't had a new team in 30 years is because those teams just kept reloading. What I think Cignetti has done, what the 2025 season has showed me, is he has rewritten how coaches can approach now college football. He did it with 23 JMU transfers, 11 Old Dominions, and I lead the charge in this with all the changes in college football. I don't like this. I don't like that. I don't like this. There is something pretty special about watching and pure and felt really old school college football to take a bunch of guys that really wanted to play football, that had experience together, who were an experienced group of players. The average age was close to 24. And then I got to just say, y'all may differ. I don't know that I've ever seen a team coached as well as Cignetti. If I am in the SEC or if I'm in one of the blue bloods of the Big Ten, and I'm sitting down with my staff today, I think we got lazy. I would say this, I'm saying we, if I was an Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, hey, we got lazy and just thinking we could bring the talent in, roll it out on the field, and we're going to be playing for national title. What Cignetti has done is he has said, no, you have got to eliminate penalties, eliminate turnovers, play excellent special teams, be balanced on offense, and play stout defense. I got all these notes here of Fletcher tripped up for a gain of 4. He was tripped up because one guy was given that extra effort, whereas Miami had the arm tackles and they were breaking free. That's the system is work the process, as Nick Saban made famous.
Yeah. So here's the thing: it's one thing to talk about the blue bloods, so to speak, or the the programs that collect all the 4 and 5 stars or have, and they're not able to collect as many because they don't stack up and sit on the depth chart. They go play places, right? So that's flattened things too, and it's allowed Indiana to come up. But it's one thing to talk about them and go, they feel like they've gotten lazy or whatever. I tweeted this last night. This is not a unique or profound thought, but if Indiana can win a national championship, and obviously they can, so can insert your favorite team here.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about Alabama. I'm not talking about Georgia. I'm not talking about Ohio State. Obviously, those teams can and probably will win them again and again soon. I'm talking about if Indiana can win it, Baylor can win it.
Hey, look, let's not forget.
You name it. A group of 5 team could win it, but more than likely, what I'm talking about is Vanderbilt really can win a national championship if Indiana can.
How close were we? I mean, we remember how close we were to having Indiana playing Ole Miss. Now, Ole Miss is not on the level of Indiana as far as, recruiting budget and stars of players and all that. I mean, Ole Miss has had plenty of top 20 recruiting classes, and they're a notch above Indiana as far as the quality of players they're bringing in. But they're nowhere close to the level of the Georgias and Ohio States and all that. And Ole Miss's quarterback is a Division II transfer, and so the Ole Miss was kind of a hybrid of blue blood and Indiana. Like they kind of had a little bit of both. So they did spend some money, and they got some guys that a lot of people wanted, but they also had some guys that nobody was after. And so, I think the fact that Ole Miss came as close as they did in the same year that Indiana did it, I just kind of reinforces what is possible. And let me throw this to you guys, because I was thinking about just the context of what Indiana accomplished. And I mentioned like in all of sports, I don't think that there is a sport out there, college or pro, that is less suited for something like this to happen than college football.
For a Cinderella, yeah.
For a Cinderella. Mm-hmm. For a team with Indiana's profile. Because we all know, like, as much as stars and big-time talent dominates college basketball, you still have the majority of the time, these teams that win the national title, they have their 2 or 3 future NBA players that are out there. And yet we have seen examples where you have a mid-major that's got a bunch of seniors that have played together for 3 years, and they can beat some of those teams. This football is different. Football, it takes so many more guys, and that's what I think makes it prohibitive. Baseball, you just need a couple pitchers to get hot at the right time, and maybe a couple of batters. But football, and especially at the college level, there is just no way something like this should be able to happen. And yet it did, and it happened emphatically.
Yeah.
I've been wanting to ask you guys this question. Is Indiana here to stay? I mean, what are we looking at next year? And then I thought the other question, who would you guess would be ranked higher at the end of next season? Miami, or because kudos to Miami, they went out and Cristobal has been there now 4 years, I believe it is, and they built a system, and they were clearly going to run the football and play defense. That's what they did. But my question is Indiana and Miami, are they here to stay? And is that even a question to ask anymore?
So I think in this landscape you can go up and down, and I think it just depends on, you've got to hit on the right guys each year in the portal and that kind of thing. And even a Cignetti at some point may make a misevaluation, or somebody gets injured, the wrong player gets injured and that kind of thing, right? But I do think both these programs have staying power. Miami, because he's built a system and he's going to get that kind of talent that similar to what they had. And then Indiana, because I think he's pretty clearly as good of a coach as we've seen, since, look, nobody's Nick Saban, right? But what I'm saying is he's in that mold. He worked for him. He's very similar to him in a lot of ways. And he's built a program probably the way Saban would have if he were going to build a program in this era. He's built it that way. Now, Saban would have had more 5 stars, right, at Alabama. But I can envision Nick Saban doing that at Indiana too. So I don't know. That's my thought. I think Do I think that means they're going to be in the playoff every year? Not necessarily, but I think they're not going back to sad sack Indiana. They've now seen how they can do it. You've got an energized fan base that probably never really believed football could be anything. They're going to circle around behind them. What's interesting is they're kind of a football school all of a sudden. Their basketball team doesn't do what it used to do.
That's right.
So what do you think, Brad? I mean, are they here to stay, or can we really say that about anybody?
After what they did the last 2 years, I think you'd be foolish to say, I think they're going to go away and we're never going to hear from them again.
But Cignetti's 64. That's the only thing.
Yeah. At the same time, I would be shocked if they make the playoff next year, just because of what they would have to still do despite totally reloading the roster. Now, do I expect them to be like 8-4? I do, but I don't know about 10 wins, and that seems to be where you've got to be. I don't know what their schedule is either, because I know they announced right after the game was over that they play Ohio State, and so they announced the date of that game. But
they're announcing the rest of the Big Ten schedules next week, so we don't know.
But given that that's one of the games they play Ohio State, I mean, look, we've seen this in other conferences, but especially the Big Ten and the SEC. It's kind of luck of the draw with the schedule. And if you end up with, you have to play in Ohio State at your place, and then maybe you've got to go on the road and play another really good team, 2 losses can come pretty easily. And I think a lot of this has to do with schedule helping you out. Not that Indiana has needed a weak schedule the past 2 years, but they haven't exactly faced murderer's row either. And it's possible that could change a little bit next year where the schedule isn't as favorable.
That's true. They did beat 6 teams that are in the final AP top 25. So there is that. But, I don't know. Todd, you asked us, what do you think?
Their last 4 games were 4 of the 6, right? So,
right. Really good teams. You asked us, Todd, what do you think? Is in Indiana, whatever here to stay means, are they here to stay? And also Miami.
I think Cignetti has won everywhere he's gone. He won at Elon, which is right down the road from where I am, and he won at James Madison, near where I grew up. So I've kind of kept an eye there. No one's got to Google him anymore. I mean, he wins, and we know that. And I think with that Mark Cuban money, that he's very proud to say that he is stroking checks. And then you just look at it this way. Look at schools when they have a successful year like this. This has been going on forever. The influx of cash that school gets because of winning something like this. Now imagine you're Indiana, supposedly the second largest alumni base in the country. And you imagine the merchandising sales and all the licensing and all of the things that are coming in with a coach like Cignetti. If you follow this, their transfer portal, they scored in the top 3, I think, in the nation on that. They've got this, what is it, Hooper who's coming in at quarterback.
Josh Hooper from TCU.
Right. And I think there's a lot of programs right now that are just they're scratching their heads and saying the formula we've always known is not working. And we've named them. I think Ohio State. I think you look at Georgia. Alabama has had some serious struggles, even though their record's been good. But I think there are a lot of schools right now that are saying we need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate what is it we're looking. Do I think Cignetti's going to hit on the portal every year the way he hit? I mean, you took a chance on a quarterback from Cal who wasn't exactly lighting it up, and he becomes the Heisman Trophy winner, and you go undefeated. I mean, that's hitting the lottery. That's hitting the jackpot right there. But he is.
I'll disagree with that.
He is good, and he is here. I think Miami. I have Cristobal is a phenomenal program builder. He knows what he wants, and I also was thinking about this last night a little bit, just looking at my notes. It wasn't that long ago when it was all about the spread and just scoring 50 points a game. And isn't it funny? I remember it was like that in the early 90s with Steve Spurrier. And then it kind of swung back. And then it got going again with a lot of the RPO stuff that Clemson was making famous with Deshaun Watson. And I think we're seeing back a very balanced approach. Teams are wanting to run the football and play keep away a little bit and be balanced. And so I think Miami's going to be there as well. But Miami is just, I don't know what to think because my Indiana doing what they have done lets me look at all these schedules and say, why can't Vanderbilt do it? Why can't Kentucky, who's a ton in the portal, this last month. If you're paying attention to what Kentucky's doing, what I do wonder is, are the D2 and FCS seniors, fifth year guys, I think they're going to get a lot more. I was talking with a coach here in the Raleigh-Durham area. He preps high school athletes. He said to us last night before the game, he said, things are changing, guys. He was like, we're seeing a lot more schools not willing to pay the money and take the chance on the stud high schooler. They'd rather go to Division II or FCS. Cignetti has made that famous.
Yeah, look, I'm sorry, you mentioned Kentucky. I think for people who don't understand Indiana and where they came from, Kentucky is a great comparison. I don't think that for most of the last 30 years that there's been a lot separating Kentucky and Indiana, and both of them are more known as basketball schools, and they're, trying to compete in football and all that. Granted, Kentucky under Mark Stoops had more success than Indiana did up until the last 2 years. But I think what Indiana did is pretty much the equivalent of if you saw Kentucky go 16-0 and win a national championship in football. I mean, that's how unlikely it is for the people in the SEC audience who might not be tuned into Indiana. That's what you just witnessed.
I don't disagree. Two things. One, Cignetti after the game said there's been a quote paradigm shift, unquote, and I think that's what we're talking about. We've been talking about these last 5 or 6 minutes. It's a paradigm shift, and one of the things he said was it means programs rather than conferences, and it means. And I would say this goes back to the staying power question. I don't think that's wrong. I think it's going to be about programs rather than conferences. So I wouldn't be so worried if I was Georgia. I wouldn't be so worried if I was Ohio State, because I think those programs will adjust, but they're going to have to adjust. But I don't think it's about conferences anymore, even though some conferences do have a tougher regular season than others. I'm not saying that. But it's not just about programs. I think it's about teams. And by that, I mean the year, not the Ohio State will always be good because they're Ohio State. I mean, I think there's some of that. Some of those natural benefits or advantages remain, but some of them are gone. But I think teams can rise up. Individual teams like a Texas Tech can rise up, and if they have a better quarterback, they can win a game or two in the playoff, right? And you would never have thought that going in. That's one of those things that couldn't have happened 5 years ago, even with a 12-team playoff under the before NIL and the portal. So I think it is a paradigm shift to where we have to talk about programs rather than conferences, and maybe teams more than programs. Does that make sense? And so some of this is going to change from year to year. There's going to be that team or a couple of those teams that you weren't thinking about in 2025 that we're going to be talking about in October and November of 2026.
One other thing that I'll add on Indiana and their staying power is I'm going to be really intrigued to see how many schools now are going to come after Indiana assistants. Because when Nick Saban first started winning consistently at Alabama, every year his staff would get rated. And when it appears that some head coach has the secret sauce, then the answer for everybody else is, okay, let's go hire one of those assistants who understands what they're doing and can, in theory, can replicate it. Very few of those guys who coached under Saban, at least in the first, I don't know, maybe decade, had much success. But obviously you look at the semifinals of this year's playoff, ultimately that strategy paid off, hiring Nick Saban assistants. And by the way, the guy who's had the most success of all those assistants is Kirby Smart, who wasn't even in the semifinals as one of those 4 this season. But how long is it going to take until teams start poaching assistants from Indiana? And when they do, will Cignetti be as good at replacing those guys as Saban was for a long time? I do think that's one of the things that finally caught up with Saban at the end. When in his final seasons after his last national championship, when the program started to take a step back, I don't think some of his coaching hires were as solid as they had been for such a long time. And that can make a difference. And so we'll see, because that is certainly a way that Indiana's program will be tested soon.
I don't disagree. I'm going to say we need to wrap this up. We've gone too long, and then we'll come back for the second half and talk about our shared faith in Jesus. But let me say one thing. Even as I mentioned, paradigm shift, think programs, not conferences, think teams, not programs. I do want to mention this, the Big Ten has now done one of those SEC type things. They've won 3 consecutive national championships with 3 different programs. Now, that would mean more to me if we were in the former era, because I do think it's programs rather than conferences and teams rather than programs. But that is something they can hang their hat on. And no SEC team has played for the title in the last 3. They weren't in the championship games in 23, 24, 25 seasons. So there you go. All right, let's go ahead and take a break. We'll come back on the other side and we'll talk about our shared faith in Christ. You're listening to Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith and College Football podcast. And welcome back to the second half of Gridiron and the Gospel of Faith and College Football podcast. George Schroeder, Brad Edwards, Todd Unzicker. This is the side when we get to talk about our faith in Christ and all sorts of things related to that. And we actually have, as you probably are listening to this week, we actually have some current events. And so there's some things that are on our heart. Todd and I we're pastors. Todd serves as the executive director of the North Carolina State Baptist Convention, Baptist State Convention. And obviously I serve as a pastor of a local church. Todd has been on staff and pastored local churches. Brad is a committed Christ follower and leader in his local church. And so this past Sunday, we actually had an event occur that kind of, I think, shocked us all in a lot of ways, where in Minneapolis, where there's been a lot of turmoil related to enforcement of immigration laws and things like that, a group of protesters walked into a church and disrupted the service for several minutes. And I think that's probably putting it fairly mildly. And it's gotten a lot of publicity. And so most of our listeners, probably almost everyone, knows about that. And so one of the questions is how does one react to that as a follower of Jesus, as a pastor, as a member of a church? How do you react to that? And what do you do if that ever comes for your church? Which I think is, let's not overdo it and act like it's the next thing that's going to happen all the time. But sometimes once the seal is broken, Todd, right? I mean, I don't know. But you guys have put out a resource, North Carolina Baptist, that I think is pretty good. First, reactions from both you guys to the events of Sunday in the Twin Cities, and then even how the church itself handled it. I thought they handled it with grace. But what do you guys think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start off. The closest thing that I can associate with this is a couple of years ago, Christopher Yuan spoke at our church. I think a lot of people listening will know who he is. If you don't, you can look him up. Yuan is his last name. And there was a group of people who had come to protest him speaking there at the church because they didn't like the content. And they were out there, a big group of them, holding up signs on the sidewalk at the side of the street at the entrance to the church. It was something that they did for the news cameras, and the news was out there. They took footage of the protest, and we did have a representative from the church who went out and invited them to come in and to listen. They were all welcome to come in and hear what he had to say, and draw their conclusions from that instead of just going off whatever they thought it was going to be. And like I said, nothing more happened. They didn't really come onto the church property. But what I start thinking about, though, in light of what just happened, is what would we have done if they had come into the building, and instead of listening as they had been invited to do, what if they had come in with the intention of disrupting everything? And then to take it a step further, like what happened last weekend was not a disagreement with the content that was being preached. I guess in a certain way it was, but that wasn't the specific purpose of them coming to that church. And if they start disrupting, I can certainly understand how a lot of people in the congregation were fearful. What is going to happen next? Because you don't know that it's only a protest, that they're only there to make a lot of noise and try to aggravate people. Someone could start vandalizing. They could start physically attacking people who are in there. You just don't know what's going to happen. And I think that's the scary thing about it. And so I'm sure there are a whole lot of churches around the country that had meetings this week on this topic. And what do we do if this happens? And what is the line? Like, where is the line, and what does it look like that if that is crossed, action has to be taken, as opposed to, hey, these are just people who are in the church, and we want people to come into the
Yeah.
church who
Right.
don't know Jesus. But there is a point where it's like, okay, you need to be asked to leave.
Well, Todd, where's the line? Let me just go with that. You're executive director of the North Carolina Baptist State Convention. And let me just say this. If you're just in the church, that's great. But these guys had disrupted the service and were marching around the room and that kind of thing. So the line got crossed and recrossed and recrossed and recrossed. But Todd, your thoughts? You've heard from multiple pastors, and you guys at the state convention there in North Carolina have put out this resource, which it's called "When Protests Come to Church: How to Prepare and Respond with Wisdom." So if you'll Google that with North Carolina Baptists, you'll be able to find that. You can also find out about Cignetti, but that's another story. So Todd, where is the line? How does that?
Yeah.
How do you handle it once that line is crossed? Maybe it's a better way to ask that.
Yeah, and that resource anybody can use, ncbaptist.org, and I'm sure Go Down the Gospel can make that available for our listeners and those watching on YouTube.
Absolutely.
I think my first reaction was I was angry. I mean, they were preparing to take the Lord's Supper, communion. That's a holy, reverent time that we get to remember the gospel, that we get to remember that Jesus' body was broken for us and his blood was shed for us. He lived the life that we should have lived and couldn't, and he died the death that we deserved. And that is a special time that believers come together for the preaching of God's word, for prayer together, for fellowship, and to take the Lord's Supper. And this was not simply a protest, as Brad mentioned, that happened to his church. That happens. This was really felt like an invasion when you watch those footage and you see terrified onlookers and people who are accosted verbally, at least in the middle of a worship service. So as a Christ follower, I felt for those believers. As a former missions pastor and seeing missionaries around the world, it's not the same, but it felt like that. You talk about a line. It felt like, okay, we're talking about people coming in and invading churches. That's, that happened during the Jim Crow South and desegregation time, that Klansmen would do these types of things.
That's
and
right.
Scare and intimidate and break up African-American worship services. And so, to see that again in this setting, I thought the pastor, Jonathan Parnell, there at City's Church in St. Paul, did a great job.
Mm-hmm.
He's a city missionary and works with dozens of other churches in the city. But as a Christ follower, I'll be honest with you, I was angry. Then I was just sad. I was just sad for what really we see, the division and the rancor in our nation.
Right.
Seems to always, you talk about a line, George. I'm not going to draw this red line, so to speak, that it's this or that, but there is definitely a line that seems to be moving out on the edges, and then, hey, I love our country. I think this country is the best country, and I'm not embarrassed to say that. And,
Mm-hmm.
and I think I've been in 52 other countries, so I feel like I can say that with some authority. But we do have the right to, and I think it's a cherished right to freedom of religion. And that is an infringement upon rights when you are disruptive of that. And so this resource, I'm not going to read the whole resource, and there's more coming, but this is something that pastors, church leaders, if you're just concerned, of practical steps, have a communications plan, have security detail, all those things. But I think one of the big thing is, Jesus was full of truth.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus was not some wishy-washy, squishy, watered-down middle. Jesus was a bold proclaimer of truth, so much so that both the left of his day, Rome, a pagan decadent society that said, hey, anything goes as long as you say your way is not the only way. They wanted to kill Jesus. And then, dare I call it the right? They wanted to kill Jesus because they wanted Israel to be great again. And they wanted, their earthly kingdom. The flip side is, and it's both equally true, this is not an either or for Christians. And what I try to teach my kids is we can be full of truth, and we should be, and we should never water that down. Thus says the Lord, for the Bible tells me so. While at the same time is to love and pray for our enemies, those that would persecute us. And I think this is a great time for Christ followers, any of our listeners. If you want to know what the message of the gospel is that we were all anti-God. We were children of wrath, the Bible tells us. But God in his great mercy, it was the kindness and compassion of God that drew us to him. And we have a chance to do that, whether it's people that are protesting outside of a church in Connecticut, or do something horrific like this, or just our neighbors that we disagree with across the street, is that we would pray for those who persecute us, that we would boldly stand on truths, and that we would pray for, because we live in a country with these types of freedoms, that we would pray for godly and just leaders who would govern and legislate in a way that honors the Lord.
Right.
You know,
which allows us to live quiet and tranquil lives. Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you, Todd. My bad.
No, I think my charge as a pastor would be to not bifurcate what Jesus brought together, and that's grace and truth. You know, truth without grace is just rabid fundamentalism, and grace without truth is just vapid sentimentality. It's a Hallmark card, and Jesus embodied both grace and truth. And I think in these troubled times that we want to pray for those, and we want to pray for our fellow believers at City's Church. I did like that I saw somebody said, I hope this is the biggest attendance and the most people come to faith at that church in her brief history. And we know that Romans says that what God is always working all things out for good to those that love him and are called according to his purpose.
That's right. I mean, look, the goal here is in everything has got to be the gospel good, for people to hear the good news and come to faith in Christ. I understand feeling angry or feeling defensive or all those things, and we do it. We have to protect the vulnerable. We have to protect the folks in the church, and I understand all that. But I'm so glad you were essentially quoting from Luke 6 when Jesus says, "I say to you who listen, love your enemies, do what is good to those who hate you, bless those who curse you, pray for those who mistreat you." That's the definition of what was happening in that church. So love your enemies, do what is good to those who are hating on you, who are cursing you, who are mistreating you, bless them, pray for them. If somebody hits you on the cheek, offer the other one also, Jesus says. Someone takes away your coat, don't hold back your shirt either. Give to everybody who asks you, and from someone who takes your things, don't ask for them back. That's so antithetical to what we think. Just as you want others to do for you, do the same for them, right? And if you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Jesus asks. Even sinners love those who love them. And by the way, we're all sinners, but he means people who are still in their sin. If you do what is good to those who are good to you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? But love your enemies, do what is good, and lend, expecting nothing in return. Then your reward will be great. You'll be children of the Most High. And this takes us back to him, for he is gracious to the ungrateful and the evil. So be merciful, just as your Father also is merciful. And I appreciate that what you said a minute ago is he's already been merciful to us. When we were his enemies, he saved us. If you're in Christ, right? And he saved you, you were his enemy. So, man, first, the only thing I would say about one other thing is when it says love your enemies, I would encourage you not to think of the people who are protesting or vote on the other end of the spectrum from you as your enemies. If they don't know Jesus, they're God's enemies, and they may see you as their enemy. But the whole point of loving your enemies is that you love them, even if they're opposed to you. And it doesn't mean that you don't hold out the truth. And it doesn't mean that you don't protect your flock. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't stand up for the rights we have, freedom of religion, which includes the freedom to worship in peace. I don't disagree with any of that. But are we going to love them in hopes that they come to know Jesus and follow him too? Not that they vote like you, but that they know Jesus and will follow him too. Anyway, I'm sorry. I kind of got on a box of soap there. I want to make sure that when we talk about that, we continue to keep the fact that people need Jesus at the forefront of our minds. So I don't know. I think that's on all of our hearts right now. And so as y'all think about that out there in podcast land, try to see it through that lens too. Do these people need Jesus? Whoever these people are, right? And let's just go from there. Good stuff. And I appreciate, Todd, that you suggested that we should pray for our city's church in the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. Let's pray for them. They have a spotlight. They never had any spotlight at all. And now they have every spotlight on them. And that's not a comfortable place to be. So let's pray that they're able to hold out grace and truth together in the correct proportions, not just in this moment, but as time goes on, and that many, many people come to Christ as a result of that. That's all I got. Brad, Todd, thoughts, questions?
Oh, I think we're good. I think we understand, like, there is the love and truth side of it, but then there's also the side that in that moment, when you got kids who are hiding under the pews,
Absolutely.
right? That you have to be thinking of them first. And it could have been worse. I mean, as bad as it was, it could have been worse. And I think we need to recognize that too. But it's just in the aftermath, once it's over, you guys are right. Our thoughts need to include the people who were violating the rights of those in church, and for them and their lives, and where do they go from here? It's possible for some of them this could be a wake-up call, that maybe it's not this week, it may be sometime in the future, that it actually occurs to them how crazy what they did actually was. And I pray that for some of them this will be the signal to them that they've gone too far and maybe they need to reevaluate things.
Yeah. I have no critique of City's Church. I thought they did a tremendous job in something no one could fathom happening. It sure seems like, based on the footage that we've seen, that they did a tremendous job of handling the situation. I have zero critique, and those of us who are involved in any way in leadership in churches should be considering, okay, what would we do and how should we do it if that ever came for us, whether that's likely or unlikely. And so I appreciate the resource that you can find at ncbaptist.org, ncbaptist.org. And again, it's called When Protests Come to Church, How to Prepare and Respond with Wisdom. So tell you what, we probably need to wrap the show. Some of you guys are listening to us most of you guys are listening to us on your favorite podcast platform. We appreciate that. Please, if you haven't, subscribe and rate and review us, hit the like button on that. And you can find us on YouTube, which is when you'll find me holding up three fingers to tell Brad something and causing disruptions in the audio feed. But just search for Gridiron and the Gospel. Find us on YouTube, and you can see our smiling mugs. That'd be fun. And you can also reach out to us on Twitter or Instagram at gridiron_gospel, at jbradedwards, at Todd Unzicker, at George Schroeder. You can email us at gridirongospelpod@gmail.com. And we'll be back. Some group of us will be back as we want to wrap up the college football season and move forward here over the next few days. And so stay tuned and look in your inbox for your podcast platform, and maybe set your notifications for the YouTube. And if you'll tune in when we come back, we'd appreciate it, for more Gridiron of the Gospel, a faith in college football podcast.